Sustainability. So global warming kind of fits into the sustainability fold. Probably a lot of you have heard of Agenda 21. Now they have a new one, right? It's Agenda 2030. So Agenda 21 was kind of for local governments. They wanted to do it by the back door without people realizing. Now they're just doing it out in the open. Agenda 2030 is for national governments and for regional governments. So we'll talk quite a bit about that. This is actually not the exact poster that I saw in Rio, but it's going to be forever burned in my mind. I was at this UN Sustainability Summit. It was chaired by a Chinese communist, Shah Zakung, who really hates Americans and says so. And it was a poster, and it was a sick Earth, an anthropomorphic Earth, right, with eyes and face, and he had the thermometer just like this one. And the doctor comes and he says, "I know your problem. You have humans." And when I saw that, I was just like, no way. They're telling us that they think humans are a disease. You know, what do you do to a disease? You try to eradicate it, right? So, you know, if we're a disease, that's serious, serious stuff. And so these sustainability zealots, they admit openly that they don't think the current population of humanity is sustainable. They want to reduce our numbers, right? And they're willing to go to very unsavory methods to do it. Here we come back to Obama's science czar, Mr. John Holdren. He was actually at this conference in Paris. And in 1977, he wrote a book with another kook, Paul Ehrlich, Eco-Science. And this is a direct quote from the book. Perhaps these agencies, these UN agencies, combined with the UN Environmental Program and the UN Population Agencies, could be developed into a planetary regime. So these are his words, right? And it's sort of an international super agency for population, resources, and environment. Such a comprehensive planetary regime could control development, administration, conservation, and distribution of all natural resources. So that sounds pretty creepy. Here's the book, Eco-Science, and there's John Holdren again. Some of the ideas they were promoting in this book: forced abortions. Women could be forced to abort. And he actually said that under our existing constitution, we could force women to have abortions. Really. You can go pick up the book at your local library if you don't believe me, and I encourage you to do so. He said the population at large, that, you know, us, we could be sterilized involuntarily. They would add drugs to the water supply to sterilize us against our will. This is in his book. This is Obama's science czar, again, in case those aren't clicking. This is the kind of people who are in charge of our government today. They wanted to seize babies from their mothers. They wanted to get rid of undesirables, people who contribute to social deterioration. So, you know, these are the same eugenicist ideas of Margaret Sanger, right? These quack theories on race and what humans are fit to live and what humans are not fit to live. I mean, these guys think of themselves as gods here, right? They're going to decide who lives and dies. They're going to decide who reproduces and who doesn't. You know, these are awesome powers that they're talking about. And these guys are in the highest echelons of power. This is Obama's science czar. He's the head of the science office at the White House. And, of course, they wanted their transnational planetary regime to control the global economy and all that other stuff that we talked about. And he wanted an armed international police force. Who could forget the armed international police force? And, of course, the middle class will have to go, right? And by middle class, you know, even lower middle class, not sustainable. Here is Maurice Strong. He was the former head of the UN Environment Program. He was also part of the Club of Rome. Big, big guy. He ended up being a billionaire, and then he had to go flee to China because he got in trouble for embezzling money. He died there last year, I believe. But he said, and my colleague Bill Jasper was at the UN summit in Rio, what was it, 23 years ago, and he heard him say this. Current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class, high meat intake, fossil fuels, electrical appliances, home and workplace air conditioning, suburban housing, none of these things are sustainable, right? So no more suburban house, no more high meat intake, no more air conditioning. That stuff is all unsustainable. So prepare for life as a caveman or a cavewoman. Here's Agenda 2030. This is kind of their global plan for where they want to take the world. It's very ambitious. It's very transparent. I mean, they openly tell you that we're moving toward global socialism. So let's take a look here at their roadmap for global socialism, fascism, technocracy, whatever you want to call it. They say the slogans, transforming our world and nobody left behind. And that means nobody, right? They emphasize this over and over again. Not one person can escape from this agenda. And they say it over and over again in this document. Climate change and the CO2 war is, of course, a key component, but it's not alone. They refer to Mother Earth, right? We're going to heal Mother Earth by surrendering our liberty and surrendering our sovereignty to the United United Nations. Islamic and communist dictators love this, right? In the article here, you can read it if you like, I quote some of the most brutal, barbaric dictators on the planet talking about how wonderful this is. I mean, the Castros, the Robert Mugabes of the world, they think this is a great plan. It's going to usher in a brave new world, as Robert Mugabe put it. Robert Mugabe, of course, is the dictator of Zimbabwe. No Senate ratification, right? So this is a super treaty, but Obama claims it doesn't need to be ratified by the Senate. It's a pseudo-treaty. It is a treaty when it's convenient. It's not a treaty. Whatever it is, it's not going to be ratified by the Senate. And it's going to cost trillions. And they brag about the fact that it's going to cost trillions. They have reports. We got to go from billions to trillions to fund Agenda 2030. So what do they say in this Agenda 2030? I had to pick just a few quick highlights, and this was real difficult. So I encourage you to read it. It's actually not that long of a document. Goal number 10, they tell us we're going toward global socialism. We need to reduce inequality within and among countries. Right? So it's not enough to have wealth redistribution domestically. We need to have wealth redistribution globally. So global socialism, right? They're flat out saying it. To do that, it will only be possible if the wealth is shared and income inequality is addressed. And by 2030, we have to ensure that all men and women, in particular the poor and the vulnerable, have equal rights to economic resources. So, you know, if this sounds like the Soviet Constitution to you, good. It should, because this is where this kind of nonsense is lifted from. And, you know, despite all the nice rhetoric about ending poverty and stuff, we know where this leads, right? We've had 100 years to watch the effects of this. It leads to poverty, misery, mass murder, and terrorism. So we commit to making fundamental changes in the way that our societies produce and consume goods and services. How are they going to do that? Well, they're going to have to control the way that our societies produce and consume goods and services. They want to achieve universal health care coverage, right? So Obamacare on steroids. That includes vaccines for all, and no one shall be left behind. Universal mental health care for everyone who doesn't quite like this plan, doesn't think this smells right, you need some extra mental health care. Sexual and reproductive health care services for everyone. And, you know, they don't even conceal it anymore. This actually is just code word for abortion, and they've told us it's code word for abortion. Hillary Clinton has told us this is code word for abortion. So global abortions, global mental health, global vaccines, global wealth redistribution, and, of course, they're coming for your children. And they tell you they're coming for your children. They say children and young women and men are critical agents of change and will find in the new goals, these Agenda 2030 goals, a platform to channel their infinite capacities for activism into the creation of a better world. Well, doesn't that sound nice? And then they get into more specifics. By 2030, we're going to ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development. We already talked about what that is. Sustainable lifestyles, right? No air conditioning, no high meat content, no babies, etc. Human rights, and we'll talk about human rights in a little bit. Gender equality, by which they mean radical feminism. Everybody needs to go to the workforce, no more moms staying at home to take care of kids. None of that stuff. Everybody will be the same. Everybody will serve the government. And nonviolence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity. So, you know, just a quick side note on human rights here, because human rights sounds really nice. How could you be opposed to human rights? Well, go read the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and you'll get a much better picture of what they're talking about, because they tell you what they're talking about. Go to Article 29, and they tell you that none of these rights and privileges may be used contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. So, I mean, that would be like having a First Amendment, and, you know, you have free speech unless your free speech isn't liked by Congress, the Supreme Court, the President, the state legislature. You know, it's a joke. So human rights are the opposite of real rights as we understand them here. And so that's why they want to ensure that all children acquire an understanding of their crazy human rights. So we'll talk real quick about the refugee crisis. Let's see how we're doing on time here. Oop. Okay, so the refugee crisis, we'll look at the numbers, the real agenda,